My name is David. I'm a senior tutor at Exampel. I've been in the business for a few years. For those of you with us here today, there is a special offer for Valentine's Day, which is 25% off, and you're welcome to just check it out after the webinar. And just to sort of focus you in on what this webinar is about, then the first chunk of the webinar is going to talk about the GRE in general. So what exactly is the GRE? How does it work? How should you study for the GRE? Especially for those of you who are first timers, and I'm assuming there are some of you who are first timers, but it's also important in general. Like if you're having trouble, some of you are having trouble in the math section of the GRE, I assume you can sympathize with the picture right now on board. It sometimes feels like you're banging your head up against the wall. And there's a really, really good reason for that. And the reason is that the GRE is not, in general, standardized tests. They're not like the tests you've done in high school or in college. And there are several reasons for this. The first of the reasons is that there are many different ways to solve each question. And honestly, this is going to be the heart of the webinar for today. And what you need to do when studying for the GRE, and it doesn't matter whether it's for the math section or for the verbal section, for all of the sections, you need to find those specific methodologies and tools that work best for you. And this is really hard to do with sort of a standard brick and mortar classroom-based approach or just by studying a book. You really need an adaptive way to do it, which ideally would be a private tutor, but not all of us have the time or money for a private tutor. And that is why we have set up this company and this platform. The second big problem with the GRE, and for those of you comparing between the GMAT and the GRE, there are a few of you those in the audience today, then in the GRE it's not as harsh of a problem, but it's still a really, really big problem, and it is that of time. And every single question you'll see on these types of exams has a solution. And I can guarantee that every single one of you, if you had 5 minutes or 10 minutes to sit on a single question, you could definitely solve it, but you don't, unfortunately. You have 2 minutes, and sometimes you have less than 2 minutes per question. And what you really need to learn when you're studying for these exams is not necessarily how do I go about plugging in all the numbers or going through all of the equations in order to actually get a rigorous solution to the problem. What you need to do is figure out how you get to the right answer quickly. That is what your goal should be when you're studying for these types of exams. Excuse me. And to bring it all together and to sort of summarize the reason why we believe that your study course should be an adaptive program and not just going over all the various books in the field, is that usually going over books is wasting so much of your time and so much of your mental energy. You really don't want to study for these exams by solving thousands and thousands and thousands of questions and sort of banging your head up against the wall, just like this unfortunate guy right here. Instead, what you want to be doing is you want to be focusing in on those things that you are good at and focusing on those things that you are bad at and those things that solve the questions well and those things that don't solve the questions well, and really finding the optimal match for you. So which type of methodologies do you understand the material well with, and how are you able to apply the material most efficiently and most quickly to get to the right answer? Okay, and all of this together is sort of condensed into one big title that we at Exampel like to call cognitive flexibility. And what is cognitive flexibility? It is your ability to choose the right tool for the right problem. So sort of when the analogy I like to use is when you're walking into the exam, you have your toolbox of tools with you, and you have your wrenches and your screwdrivers and your pliers and all the other stuff that might be in your box of tools. And for every given question, you need to pick the right tool to use, and you will have many, many different options. All right, and let's go through a few examples of this. So just to start off, let's start by looking at this question right here on the board right now. So for every positive x and y, 3x plus 2y divided by x plus y is between either 0 and 1, 1 and 1.5, 1.5 and 2, 2 and 3, or 3 and 4. And what I would like you to do is to solve this question and to write the answer in chat. But more interesting to me than the actual answer that you got to is the way that you got to that answer. And again, the core of this entire webinar is going to be about cognitive flexibility, is about how many different tools are there to solve a specific question and which of these tools works best for you. So give it a go. Give it a go. Try solving the question. And please write to me in chat, one, what do you think the right answer is? And B, how did you get to that answer? No idea. So many options, stressful. So what would you do though? There are so many options. Um, but what would you do? If you had to try solving a question, what would you do? Even if you're not sure, give it a guess. Process of elimination is a great way to start. And we're going to go over a method that does exactly that. There we go. We have one person saying plug in values, another person talking about the denominators. What else? What else? What other methods can you think of to solve this question? And what do you think the right answer is at the end of it? All right. Um, so let's go over it together, shall we? Let's go over this question together. And this is a really nice question because it really emphasizes the fact that there are so many different ways to solve the problem, and which way works best for you is what really matters at the end of the day. So if you like the textbook sort of answer to this question, the one that they might teach you in school, which is like a rigorous formal mathematical solution, is the one that's right before you on the screen right now, which is something that we call a precise approach. I'll explain what that means later. And basically, you can see that in the middle you have the fraction, our expression 3x plus 2y over x plus y. You can sort of subtract x from the numerator to get on the left 2x plus 2y divided by x plus y. And then you can sort of factor that out, the x plus y, cancel them, and you get 2. You can do the exact same thing on the right-hand side. You can add a y, and then you once again cancel out the x plus y, and you get a 3. And therefore, this is a very rigorous mathematical way to show that the correct answer to this question is D. And I agree, it's really not intuitive to always see this sort of thing. Like, I mean, how on earth should I know that I need to add an x or subtract a y or whatever it is I have to do in order to solve a question? And this is why usually, not always, but very often, there's a much faster way to solve this type of question. And in fact, what most people, the method most people use in order to solve this question is exactly what you guys have been writing in chat, which is plugging in numbers. And in this specific case, the beauty of plugging in numbers is that it really does not matter which numbers you choose, so long as they're positive, like the question states. So why not just choose really easy numbers to plug in? So for example, if we take x equals y equals 1, that's pretty much the easiest combination of numbers we could think of. Then 3x plus 2y becomes 3 plus 2, and x plus y becomes 1 plus 1. Together, this is 5 divided by 2, which is 2.5. And what does this mean? Like some of you guys have written in chat, it means that we can eliminate all of the incorrect answers. And sometimes the beauty of a standardized exam, if if you like to call this beauty, I think it's a pretty cool thing, is that you absolutely know that one of the 5 answers before you has to be correct. So if for every single positive x and y, the expression 3x plus 2y divided by x plus y has to be one of these 5 options, and we just randomly picked x equals y equals 1 and we got 2.5, that means it can't be A, because we found a value of x and y where A doesn't work. We found a value where B doesn't work, and C doesn't work, and E also doesn't work. So we found x equals y equals 1 eliminates every single one of the answers except for D, and therefore D is the right answer. Now, this is what we call an alternative approach because we didn't actually rigorously prove that the answer is between 2 and 3. We just eliminate everything else. And if someone were to change like the numerators, they'd write, I don't know, 5x plus 6y or something like that, then the answer would, of course, be different. But that doesn't matter at all to us because we have solved this specific question and we can move on. And a third type of method with which to solve this question is what we like to call a logical approach. And this is sort of a type of approach which often takes a step back. It sort of tries to zoom out from the question and to sort of really understand what's going on here. And in this case, the concept at work in this specific question is the concept of weighted average. And you can think of it by trying to think of a range. So, you have an expression with 2 variables. It has both x and y in it. And so you can pause and ask yourself, what would happen if I had only y in the expression? What would happen if I had only x? And so if I had only y, so if the x was very close to 0, then the expression would be 2y divided by y. and that equals 2. On the other hand, if the y was very, very, very close to 0, so we had only x's, then it would be 3x divided by x, and therefore it is between 3. And this is sort of a slightly more sophisticated zoom out type way in order to understand that the answer is in fact D. And sort of putting these three methods one next to the other shows three very, very different ways to approach this question. Most of you went naturally towards the picking a number, the alternative approach. There was one person who started playing around with the denominators and numerators, the more precise type of approach. When you get deeper into the math, when you're sort of more practiced with it and less stressed out about it, and that takes time, that'll happen eventually. Then you can also try looking for sort of logical type shortcuts. And together, these three methods are what we like to call the palgorithm. And the palgorithm stands for the PAL, the precise, alternative, and logical approaches that you've seen. And they're essentially a way that we like to categorize every single one of the approaches with which to solve GRE questions. So precise type approaches are essentially just write the equations in the right order and put the right numbers in them and then solve all of them, do all the math, and you'll get to the right answer. Very, very formal type of way. If you're very, very comfortable with quant, then that's great. If you're not so comfortable with quant, then it's probably not the way to go for you. Alternative types of methods are methods that I like to call Sherlock Holmes type methods. So they're looking for all sorts of clues in the question that can help you get to the right answer, even if you don't actually know why that answer is correct. In the previous question, we didn't prove that the answer was between 2 and 3, but we eliminated everything else, and that's all that's left, and that's good enough for us. Other examples of these types of method include just using, for example, the answer. So if you have a long word problem, I don't know, you have a train driving one way and a train driving another way, and something about the speed and the distance and all that sort of stuff. And then end of the day, the question asks you, what is the time before the trains meet? And then you have, answers 10 seconds, 15 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, and so on. Then instead of trying to create an equation to generate the right answer, what you can do is you can look at the various answer choices. And you can try them all out. You can say, well, let's say that, I don't know, answer choice C was right. What would that mean about the speed, about the distance, about the time? And this is sort of like reverse engineering the question. And finally, the L in the palgorithm is for the logical approaches. And like I said earlier, this is a little bit about zooming out. It's about really once you understand the deeper topics. And this is, by the way, it's also true for verbal. Like I'm giving quant examples here today, but this is very much true for verbal. So for example, in verbal, it's often about the emotional tone of the statement. It's about is the statement, say for example, in sentence equivalence, it's about is the sentence more positive or more negative? It's what is the connotation that you're trying to create? It's what are the different analogies and so on and so forth. Sort of like it's like a zoom out type approach of the question, which doesn't go through all of the various equations or all of the various small steps. For those of you, some of you mentioned that you had also studied for the GMAT. So in sentence correction, there's a type of question on the GMAT called sentence correction, which is very much about grammar and that sort of thing. So a precise approach to a very grammar-oriented question would be just following the grammatical rules, whereas a logical approach would talk about the meaning. What is the meaning behind it? Okay, and again, sort of my goal in talking so much about this palgorithm is to try and help you understand how you should prepare for the exam. So again, what are we recommending? We are recommending that once you start studying for the material, once you've sort of passed the basic steps of just learning the ropes, remembering what the rules are, remembering how to apply the various rules, brushing up on your vocabulary, especially for the GRE, you're going to have to probably do a lot of work brushing up on your vocabulary. Once you've passed sort of those basic steps and you're on the next stage, and this next stage is sort of figuring out how to apply all of these rules, then you should also try and ask yourself which of the methods work best for me and which don't work best for me. And additionally, you want to look at the questions. You want to learn to look at the questions. So there's all kinds of really, really common traps, for example, both again in verbal and in quant. So in quant, for example, common traps involve forgetting about zeros, or all sorts of things to do with powers and roots or quantitative comparisons. In verbal, really common traps, for example, in reading comprehension is asking misleading questions or having answer choices which partially answer the question and partially don't answer the question, all sorts of nuances of detail in the reading comprehension passage. And so once you've sort of learned what tools there are out there, then you should also need to focus in on the questions themselves and sort of learn what does a question that I am good at look like? So is there a specific type of question that I always do well at and I should focus and I should spend more time on? Is there a type of question that really gives me a problem? Every time I see this, I don't know, rate and work question, or every time I see something to do with integers, or every time I see a specific vocabulary word, I just, I flake out. Then this is something that you can recognize. It's something that you can skip right away. You can flag it and you can come back to it at the end of the section when you have more time. And together, they should form the core of your strategy for approaching the GRE. And just sort of to drive home how important it is to recognize and to understand the different strategies, and especially what works for you, I'd like to show another example question. And so this one I'm just going to solve. I'm not going to ask you to do it because it's a little bit complicated. So let's do it together. So the question goes like this. Of the 900 guests that attended a wedding, 36% were women. If 450 men left the wedding, excuse me, the woman would be what percentage of the remaining guests? And so the sort of straightforward way to try and solve this sort of question is to just calculate everything. So let's try that out. Let's see how it works. And this is, as mentioned, a precise type of approach. It's just putting in the numbers and doing all the calculations. On the GRE, you even have a calculator to help you out, and you can just do it. So 36% of 900 is the number of women. So that's either using our calculator or just doing it like this. 36 divided by 100 times 900. You can cancel out the 100, 36 times 9, use your calculator or do it on paper, and you get 324 women at the wedding. Okay, so that's great. So now we know that we have 324 women at the wedding, and then we look back to our question. We say, okay, 450 men left the wedding. So that means that we have 900 minus 450. We have 450 guests remaining. And so now what do we need to do? We need to calculate the woman would be what percentage of the remaining guests. Okay, so that means we have 324 women. We have to divide it by 450. Again, if you're on the GRE, and most of you are, you're lucky you can just do this in a calculator. If you're not, or if doing the calculator takes time for whatever reason, then you'll need to do it in your head. And this is not such a fun equation to have to do in your head. In particular, you have to recognize that you can factor out the threes, and you can divide them, and then you get to 36 divided by 50. You multiply that to get 72 over 100, which ends up at 72%. Okay, so really, really long, arduous process. It gets you to the right answer. It always gets you to the right answer, so long as you didn't make some sort of calculator mistake or just pen and pencil type of mistake along the way. But it takes a while. And it's not terribly fun to have to do all this stuff, especially not if you're stressed out about this kind of thing. And the question is, can we solve this question in a different way? Is there a faster way, a more efficient tool with which to solve this question? And so once again, I think I'm going to turn it over to you. And what do you guys think? So sort of take a look to maybe look at all the equations and so on we've done, but most importantly, look at the question. And do you think there's an easier way to solve this sort of question? How would you do it without having to go through all of this calculation? Anyone have any idea? Are y'all with me? All right, cool. I'll give you, say, 20, 30 seconds to see if you have any sort of an inkling of an idea of what might a faster way of solving this question be. Yep. And what I encourage you to do, besides thinking for yourself, is also just reading the chat and see what your friends, what your colleagues are writing in there. Some people are thinking, some people are saying this is the fastest way. Other people are suggesting other ways. I think the person at the end right there is suggesting exactly the way that I'm going to talk about in a second. So this isn't to highlight that the one way is better than all of the other ways. It doesn't work like that. What it works like is understanding that there are multiple different approaches to a given question. And then what I'm really, really urging you to try and do is to figure out the different ways and figure out which of those ways works for you. All right, so let's take a look at a different approach for this question. And it goes like this. And this is a logical approach, as I think some of you have mentioned. It essentially takes a step back and it zooms out from the question. It says, well, I mean, the percentage is the part over the whole, right? So at the start, we said that, 36% were women, we calculated, and then we calculated the number of women divided by the remaining guests, okay? So essentially, the percentage of women is the number of women divided by the number of all of the guests. And so we know that 450 men left the wedding, which means that none of the women left. So you have exactly the same number of women, but now you only have half of the guests, right? Because exactly half of the guests left the wedding. And what does this mean? It means that the percentage is exactly twice what it was before. So instead of it being 36% before, it now has to be exactly double that. And it's now 72%. So once again, we get to answer choice D. And this is, as is common to most logical types of solutions. It's very, very fast. It's very, very wordy. There are no equations on the board. It is more sophisticated. It is harder to see. And I'm not trying to push all of you, oh, logical is amazing, you should try this. If the fastest way for you is to just go through the equations that we went through before, sort of get to all of this stuff and then use the calculator for all the hard bits. And that's really straightforward. You understand what you're doing. You're not stressed out. None of the bad stuff happens. Then do it. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all how you get to the right answer, so long as you get to it. But this type of solution is very, very useful to know. It's very useful to be acquainted with. Okay, so I think I've showed you two problems so far. In the first problem, I just sort of wanted to show you slightly the diversity between the approaches. In this problem, I had one more slide to show it. I wanted to also compare the time. So the difference in time between solving the question. This is a question from our website. Like, this is one of the questions that we use to teach. And because we're an online platform and because we know how long it takes every student who answers correct or incorrect, we can also sort of gather the data and really use that data to help optimize the solution approach and so on and so forth. So the first solution, the very, very computationally involved solution, takes quite a long time for most of our students to solve, 2.5 minutes. Probably just because it takes a while to set up the equations, to understand what you have to do. Much of this data is from GMAT students, actually, not GRE, so they don't have a calculator to help them out either. And the logical solution, though it might take quite a while to figure out sort of how you should do it, it still takes less time overall. So the tools are not only sort of for your convenience, as it were, what do you work better with? It's also a real time issue. And as mentioned, one of the big problems on the GRE and in standardized tests in general is that you just do not have enough time in order to solve the questions. Okay, so let's say you've done all of that. Let's say you finished the first stage of just learning all of the material. You've finished, this is like the first stage of learning in general. It's just, brushing off the rust, learning the ropes, that sort of thing. I don't think I mentioned it before. I suppose I can just mention it here. For most people, this is a really, really boring and hard stage that no one really likes. It's just learning all of this stuff. So at least on our part, we really, really do put in a lot of effort in order to try and make it interactive. So, we have little videos along the way. We pause along the videos in order to ask you questions, that sort of thing. Even if you're not going to be studying with us. And I do recommend that you maybe try studying in groups or find some way to make this material more interesting for you. Otherwise, it'll probably be hard to get your head wrapped around it. So anyways, you've done that. You've learned the ropes of the material. You've learned all of the different approaches and all the different ways that you can apply the material. And just to recap that can be divided into this essentially, which is both learning which types of tools work well for you and also learning what types of traps and so on to look out for. Once you've done all that, at some point in your studies, you're probably going to hit a point, I hope you don't get to this, but many students do, where they sort of just hit a wall, which is to say, I don't know what type of score you guys are aiming for. Like, I didn't ask that at the start. You can, you're welcome to type it into chat. But you're stuck at that 340 or 350 or wherever it is. Maybe you're stuck at a 360 and you need a 365. Yeah, and yeah. And the question is, how do you break through that glass ceiling? So how do you recognize that you're at a wall, and what do you change in order to get beyond that wall? And usually, the required change is not doing more of the same. So I don't know if there are retakers in the audience among you, but if there are those of you who have taken the exam before and need to take it again, then usually doing more of the same isn't going to be enough. Unless you have found a specific area that you're weak in, that you just need to push up that area and you'll be fine. Usually you need to take a step back, and to look at the bigger picture. And in this case, it's to look at your mistakes. And the mantra here is that mistakes are opportunities. And one thing that I do recommend to every single one of you, excuse me, is to maintain an error log throughout your studies. So usually when practicing, what we recommend to students is to solve questions in chunks of, say, 5 to 10 questions, and then to pause, and then to look over those 5 to 10 questions, to check your answers, and to really take the time to think, why did I get this question right? Why did I, if I got it wrong, what did I miss? Sort of, why are the wrong mistakes wrong? Sort of what makes them wrong? To really, really try to debug this type of thing. And in doing so, we generally recommend that you divide your mistakes into 3 types. So one type of mistake is a professional type of mistake. And what we mean by this is a type of mistake of you just didn't know the material. Like you forgot a specific geometry rule, you didn't know the vocabulary, you missed some nuance of the reading comprehension text, that sort of thing. It's really a material, a mistake of going back and learning the ropes of whatever that topic is. A second type of mistake, second category of mistake, is a technical mistake. And these are the most annoying, unfortunately, but we make them all the time. These can be mistakes like doing the calculation wrong, misclicking on the calculator. These can be, and you'd be surprised how many people make mistakes because they answer the wrong question. So for example, a question asks you you have to compare X to Y, and they flip around quantity A with quantity B. You did everything right, and then you mark the wrong answer, that sort of thing. In reading comprehension, again, they didn't answer the question that they were actually asked. The question asked you about the author's opinion, and you didn't answer about the author's opinion. You answered about, I don't know, whoever the passage was talking about, his opinion. This is a technical type of mistake, and it's usually about focus. So if you're making lots and lots of technical mistakes, your main solution tool, the main way to approach solving this type of mistake is usually to slow down, which either means you need to define a guessing strategy. So don't even bother trying to answer every single one of the questions, but rather pick and choose. So pick and choose to first answer the sort of easy to medium questions that you know how to deal with, and then go back to the hard questions later on. And of course, you do want to put in some sort of answer for all of the questions, but it's better to sort of, take the time to answer 80% of the questions very, very well, as opposed to try answering 100% of the questions, and sort of semi-sloppily. It's just not worth it in terms of mistakes. And the third type of mistake is often strategic. So if we were looking at the questions above, then maybe you tried picking numbers in a question where picking numbers is a really, really bad idea. Maybe it was a quantitative comparison question, and the best way to solve the question is to maybe assume that quantity A equals quantity B, and take it from there, see what happens. There's a logical type of solution. And instead, what you tried to do is you tried to do all sorts of algebra, and messed it up somehow. A strategic mistake could also be a timing mistake. So it's getting sucked into questions. Sometimes some students have an issue where they know they can solve a question. There's just this specific question that they know if they put the extra 30 seconds or minute into it, they'll get it. And they end up wasting 5 minutes on a single question. And that is a horrible mistake to make. So don't make that mistake if that is you. And anyways, once you have this really, really big and dense error log, it needs to be informative. So you really need to learn from it. You really need to be able to say, this type of question or method works well for me. This type of mistake is something I should be careful about. Once you have that, then you need to take the time to learn from it. And then you can implement these mistakes. You can seek out to tackle similar questions. Maybe your implementation, which is to say, how am I going to go about solving this error, is to switch up the game, to switch to a different methodology. And maybe it's just to work more carefully on your Scratchpad. Maybe that's all you need to do. Instead of trying to solve word problems in your head and getting confused, if you write them down, then things become much, much clearer. And this is the type of thing that we work with our students about. And even if you choose not to work with us, this is definitely something that you should put your own focus into. And that is the secret behind rapid improvement. Specifically on our website, the main tool that we use to sort of help you rapidly improve is user feedback. So every time you answer a question correctly, we suggest a few of the really common frequent solution tools. So these are the tools that we find that most students use to solve this sort of question. And that helps you focus you in on what did I do to actively solve the question? What are the sort of broad categories that I should be thinking in? So for example, in the options on the board on the left here, what was the main tool that you used? So drawing or using the figure to see the logic, this is like a type of approach for geometry questions. So when you are able to trust the figure, you can sort of just use your, your hands and your eyes and measure the distances and you're done. If you're allowed to trust the figure, this isn't always the case. Writing down the different options, if for example, it's a combinatorics question, using a formula for precise. Anyways, these are different categories of tools with which you can solve questions, and it really helps to focus you in on what you should look for. And on the other hand, if you got a question wrong, then what we do is we, again, give you a set of common mistakes that students make. And the goal of this is to help you out. It's to really help you to pause and think, what did I do wrong? How can I avoid making this mistake again? And this is the improvement phase on our platform. And then, of course, there's an AI behind the scenes that sort of takes all of these data and integrates them together and helps you to choose the best methods for you and suggest questions that we feel will best help your learning. And this again goes back to, I think, the first or the second slide in this webinar. Solving thousands of questions is really the wrong way to go for most people. Like, I mean, unless you have all day, every day for months on end, which most of you probably don't. And honestly, even if you don't, I would rather you put your time into more healthy things than studying for the tests. Then you really want to focus in on which types of questions are doing the work and which type are not. And this is how to do it. Last but not least is the optimization. This sort of binds everything together, what we've been talked about. So on our platform, we go through all of the different types of solutions available. These are sort of student suggested solutions and our solutions. And we pick those solutions that sort of match your profile the best based on what you've done so far. We offer them to you. You can, of course, look at other solutions. You could look at your own solutions. And this is how you learn. There's a mountain of statistics behind the algorithm. Honestly, I think it's pretty cool. I'm part of the team that does the statistical analysis in some of the cases. And it's really interesting to see all the stuff that goes on there. And there is, specifically for us, then there's a lot of external recognition. So that's really cool. We're really happy with that. And there's really good customer reviews. You can go check us out on Trustpilot. This is where we put in the reviews, and also on GMAT Club, there's a few reviews hanging around for those of you taking the GMAT. And most importantly, there's a success guarantee. So again, for those of you who are retakers, we do offer a 6-point guarantee for improvement or money back for the GRE from your previous exam under certain conditions. For the GMAT, it's 70 points, if I'm not mistaken. And this really goes to show how much we believe in our method and how much we believe in our platform. All right, so this has been a slightly shorter webinar than usual because it was meant to be a joint webinar with Prep Advisor. But what we can do right now is we can just open this up to questions. So there's quite a bit of time, like we have an extra 20 minutes or so in the webinar, which again was supposed to be filled by Prep Advisor, but they had some last minute issues. And so if any of you have specific questions that you're interested in, or things that I said today that you don't quite understand, or would like me to recap, or so on and so forth, please feel free to ask. So, I am a tutor, and I will be happy to help you in any way that I can. I have a question on how to approach the vocab. Sure, what's your question? So I know people who have taken the exam and they say that memorizing, understanding common GRE words was not effective. This is true and not true in my experience. So for example, for sentence equivalents, you really need to know the words. There's pretty much no way around it. If you don't, and if you're not terribly familiar with the sentence equivalent format, then just go online and check out a few questions. But this is really a type of question where you can understand the context. You can understand the general idea of what the sentence is trying to say. But on the harder questions, you just need to know the words. Otherwise, it's not going to help you at all. For easy and medium questions, you're probably going to know the words anyways. Sometimes you can get away with some sort of suffix and prefix game, but usually you just need to know the words. For reading comprehension, on the other hand, you're absolutely right. Knowing the words is not effective at all. Because reading comprehension isn't about specific words. It's about understanding the passage as a whole. And in this specific case, very often you can infer a word from context because it's, it's a law. It's usually a big sentence, and very often it's not even important to understand individual words. If you're sort of struggling with learning the words, then the words that I would focus on first off are, let's call them the contrast of the logical type words. So, all the words that, like therefore, furthermore, words or phrases like on the other hand, instead of, things that show logical switch. These types of words are words that are very, very important to know. And sort of if you're optimizing which types of vocab words to learn and which not to, then I would start off with those and then sort of run down the list. There's really, unfortunately, there's no way to learn all of the words that you'll need probably. And honestly, it's really hard to say which words will actually be on the exam. The easiest way to sort of to gauge your current vocab ability is just try it out. Take a practice exam, see how, especially the sentence equivalents and the text completion sentences, see how hard or easy they are for you. And based on that, make a decision as to how much time you want to spend on vocab. Also take into consideration what sort of a score you need. So that would be my general recommendation for vocabulary. To the person asking, can I have a recording of this webinar? Yes, we email out the recording. I think it's within a day or two of the webinar completion. I'm not exactly sure about the details there. So long as you've signed up, you will get a recording of the webinar. Do you think that preparation should go without breaks? So what do you mean by breaks? Do you mean like preparing for a week, then taking 2 weeks off, then another week? Or do you mean preparing for 5 hours with no breaks? So in general, and this is, sort of also why school is scheduled this way. Most people have difficulty concentrating for more than an hour at a time. Okay, vacation for a week. So let me just sort of give two answers to the question. In terms of daily scheduling, I don't know if you guys are also working or not, if you're sort of sitting all day and studying or not. But usually sitting for more than an hour or two at a chunk, for most people is not very effective. You're going to want to put in a small 10-minute break in the middle there, just sort of to keep your energies up. And you're probably not going to want to have a study session longer than 3 to 4 hours at most, after which you want a long break. Long break is at least half an hour, maybe an hour. So just to sort of completely detox as much as possible from the whole learning experience. In terms of general studying, then if you can do it without having a whole week vacation, that would be best. Even if you can have maybe half an hour a week during your vacation, just so you know, you don't want things to relax. You don't want to forget what you've done. If you're retaking the exam, then between when you take your first exam and when you start studying for the next one, then and hopefully none of you are going to be in that position, but unfortunately some of us are. Then you will certainly want to take a week off just to sort of get your mind fresh and ready for the next adventure, as it were. But in general, no, don't take an entire week off from studying. Try to at least have half an hour a day of doing something related to GRE and GMAT, depending on which exam you're taking. Any more questions? For international students or anyone taking the GRE shortly, let's say in a month or two, how would you improve reading speed? Ooh, reading speed is a doozy. So the only way to improve reading speed is to read. I'll just be straight up. And we do recommend to all of our students, especially for those not native speakers, to have half an hour to an hour, preferably an hour a day of reading. On our website in the reading comprehension section, we suggest a list of reading materials that we found to be sufficiently high quality and let's call them half academic in nature. So they sort of deal with academic style content, but they're not written for an academic actually. And this is similar to the types of passages you'll see on the GRE themselves. And so just to take those and spend an hour reading them. And what's really, really important with reading speed is to understand that when you're reading, you're not just trying to get through the text as quickly as possible. You really need to understand. And this is especially true for reading comprehension, but it's also true for longer word problems, for example. And to do this, what you want to do when practicing reading is to practice active reading. Which is to say to pause as you're reading to make sure you understand the assumptions that people are trying to make, the various arguments, to think for yourself what could strengthen or weaken the things that the author is trying to say, to create a big picture in your mind of the topic of the passage, that sort of thing. So that is how you should practice reading. And passively, that will also, of course, improve your reading speed. How could I prevent flagging? By flagging, do you mean flagging a question you don't know about? Like you don't know how to answer? I mean, I don't think that's an issue. No, so I'm not familiar with the term then. What do you mean by flagging? Ah, how can you prevent yourself getting, oh, that sort of flagging, tired out during the exam? So this is actually what the practice exams are for, the power prep exams for the GRE, the CATs for the GMAT. This is exactly what they're about. So in these exams, you're not only gauging your current score ability, sort of trying to understand what sort of score you're going to get, you're also just rehearsing for the exam. You're sitting there for 3-hour chunks or 3.5-hour chunks at a time, and you're just practicing doing everything. And this is a really, really important aspect of the practice exams that most people don't understand. So this is why we always recommend in the practice exam to do it as though it were the real test. Try to do it at the same time of day, without disturbances, without phones, just you and the exam with exactly the same breaks and exactly the same time structure. This is one thing to do. The second thing to do is, standard life advice, I suppose. So exercise, get a good night's sleep, don't eat too much, bring, a little bit of water, but not too much, maybe bring some chocolate, that sort of thing. There's no other specific advice, not really. Don't get sucked into specific questions. So if you're looking at a question that you know is going to drain you, then it might be better to sort of flag that question and skip and come back to it later on. Other than that, there isn't really anything to say. Okay, last question for the day. And then we will close this webinar, and I will thank you very much for being here. All right. So once again, thank you everyone for having been here today. This has been a webinar about how to build up your own personal winning strategy for the GMAT. We, of course, recommend that you go out to our website and check us out. You can just set up a free trial account. You can get 25% discount on any of our courses now for Valentine's Day. And however you choose to study, whatever you choose to do, I wish you the best of luck. Remember that the GRE, the GMAT, all these standardized tests, they're not actually the goal. They're just stepping stones on your way to the goal. And best of luck in whatever it is that you are trying to achieve. So I'll hopefully see you on our website. And thank you.